There is a truth anyone who has ever lived off the land understands, from the very moment a blade touches an animal's skin. Slaughter isn't the beginning of a meal, it's the beginning of a life or death. Race, the Vikings had to fight hour by hour, because the instant the last trace of warmth left the body, every strand of muscle entered a rapid decline so fast that overlooking even a single afternoon could turn a family's lifeline into an invisible source of disease. In a Scandinavia with no refrigerators, no ice houses, nothing but cold winds and inherited memory, fresh meat became a dangerous luxury. It could make you feel full for a few hours, yet it carried the quiet warning that every passing minute was a step closer to ruin. That's why slaughter days were never the private moment of a single household, but the coordinated machinery of an entire community. Voices calling across the farmyard, fires rising in the shared courtyard, knives and axes passed from hand to get the butchering done before flies, moisture, and temperature destroyed everything they had worked for. Archaeology in Jutland shows clean, decisive, repeated cut marks, clear evidence of portions being divided immediately among multiple families. To understand the Vikings, you must understand this tension. A single cow offered around 150 kilograms of meat, an instant form of wealth that, if not handled properly, would become a toxin capable of weakening an entire village in just 2 days. That is why the battle against fresh meat was always the first warning bell of winter. And if you want to keep uncovering survival secrets like this, leave a thought below and continue with me to the next part of the journey. If the Vikings had to race against the clock with fresh meat, then with salt, they stepped into another battle, even more silent. The battle to secure the only mineral capable of extending life through winter. Modern people treat salt like a cheap seasoning, but in the old Scandinavian world, it held a value close to gold, because just 1 kilogram of salt could save an entire family by preserving up to 10 kilograms of meat for weeks, turning the most perishable resource into a stable source of energy for whole crews on dangerous sea voyages. Archaeology at Gedeby reveals wooden barrels soaked with salt and animal protein, evidence of a salting process that was systematic, precise, and calculated down to the day. But the most shocking part lies elsewhere. Despite the assumption that the northern seas were full of salt, the Vikings actually had almost no naturally accessible salt sources. They had to boil seawater for hours, burning through wood, time, and labor, or they were forced to buy it from England, the Baltic, or even inland Europe. This created a paradox. Warriors who terrorized the seas were completely dependent on a tiny resource they could not produce for themselves. And that scarcity turned salt into a political weapon. The Gragas laws, record disputes over the control of Salinas. Some communities survived winter simply because they had more salt than their neighbors. In the Viking world, the one who held salt didn't just hold food. He held time, strength, and the ability to send an army farther than any rival. If you think salt is just a seasoning, ask yourself this. What would happen to an entire war band if their stores were reduced to nothing but fresh meat? Don't hesitate to leave your thoughts, because sometimes the smallest stories, like a grain of salt, reveal how an entire civilization truly worked. In modern imagination, Viking ships slice across the open sea, powered by muscle and courage. But archaeology from Gedeby reveals something few would ever expect. Behind every raid, every ocean-crossing journey, were wooden barrels lying silently in storage, small objects so powerful they could determine the success or failure of an entire army. Inside them wasn't silver, gold, or weapons, but layers of tightly salted meat, preserved all the way down to the final fiber. And the shocking truth is this: what seemed ordinary was actually the real foundation of Viking warfare. Each barrel could feed dozens of sailors for weeks, turning a group of warriors who would normally exhaust quickly into a force capable of pushing deeper into the continent, launching surprise attacks on European monasteries, towns, and fortresses. Archaeology shows traces of salt, fat, and collagen still clinging to barrel fragments, undeniable evidence that food preparation was run like a military operation. No emotion, no improvisation, just precise calculations of rations, time, and shelf life. What makes this image even more haunting is the silence of those barrels. They made no sound. They couldn't be wielded in a hand, yet they were stronger than any axe, because a well-fed army could travel 3 times farther, strike twice as hard, and survive far longer than anyone relying on luck alone. In the Viking world, every salted meat barrel wasn't just food. It was an invisible weapon with destructive power that stretched across all of Europe. Inside the soot-darkened longhouses of the Vikings, smoke wasn't just a sign of the hearth. It was the thin boundary between life and death, an ancient technology shaped by an obsession with time and the fear of rotting meat. What astonishes archaeologists from Coppergate in York to Ribe in Denmark are traces of structures built specifically for smoking. Resin-coated wooden walls, charred fish bones showing signs of long-term exposure to hot air, and layers of oleine clinging to roof beams. All of it proving this wasn't a cooking habit, but a system operated as a deliberate preservation method. Smoke seeped into every fiber of the meat, leaving the flavor we consider a delicacy today. But for them, it was evidence of a few extra weeks of life. Few people realize that properly smoked meat can last 2 or even 3 months without spoiling, long enough for a ship crew to cross dangerous waters without needing to hunt again. Yet the haunting paradox of this scene lies in how fragile the flame itself was. A single stray spark could burn the entire house down, but when controlled, it became the force that held back decay and protected dozens of lives. In the Viking world, smoke wasn't just the byproduct of fire. It was the invisible shield that defended them against their most dangerous enemy: time. In modern memory, Viking thing. Assemblies are often described as symbols of freedom, places where anyone had the right to speak, but that image only reflects half the truth. The other half, the darker, more secret half, lies in the fact that the most important decisions at the thing didn't revolve around land or honor, but around something that seemed most ordinary: meat. In a world where winter could stretch on like a curse, and where every household survived only by keeping food from spoiling through the dark months, laws about meat held as much power as laws of war. The 11th century Gragas texts record prohibitions that sound trivial at first, like cheating when selling meat or hiding spoiled cuts inside salted barrels. But in that context, such acts were equal to treason. A single piece of tainted meat didn't poison just one person. It could spread through an entire community and throw a whole village into collapse during the cold season. That is why the thing became the place where every dispute involving meat was judged with almost religious severity. The elders, holding both memory and authority, stood in the center of the old stone circle, where the wind howled through the valley like the voices of unseen ancestors watching, and a single wrong ruling could cost dozens of people their lives. What terrified the Vikings wasn't the punishment itself, but the understanding that a single vote at the thing could determine whether their family had enough meat to make it to spring. In that world, a vote about meat carried more weight than honor, because one broken rule could condemn an entire community to starvation. If you ever thought Viking law was only about warriors and land, try leaving a thought of your own. How long could a society like that survive if it ignored this invisible but vital law? There is a paradox anyone who reads the sagas can feel, but one that only becomes truly clear when archaeology lifts each layer of ice. Winter wasn't just the Vikings' enemy, it was their unwilling ally, a cold god that saved them from hunger while being ready to betray them the moment they trusted it most. When the freeze covered Scandinavia, meat hung outdoors suddenly became durable food, slabs frozen as hard as stone, lasting for weeks without salt or smoke. At Tiors and Sardalur, traces of cold storage pits have been found, patches of ground where natural ice kept entire villages alive. But what makes this scene legendary and terrifying is its absolute fragility. One unexpected thaw, arriving late in the season or carried in by warm winds from the sea, and the entire meat store would shift from deep red to pale gray within hours. Then, after just 5 days, turn into a stench of death spreading across the valley. Climate records from the 9th-10th century, solar minimum, show abnormal fluctuations that left the Vikings unable to predict nature. And whenever winter turned, whole communities were forced into desperate survival maneuvers, reallocating rations, sacrificing livestock, even abandoning their farms to find colder ground. Not everyone made it through. In the Viking world, the cold was a two-faced god, preserving meat while capable of turning every hope into ash in a single March afternoon. If you ever thought winter was just a backdrop, leave your thoughts below. Can people ever truly trust nature when nature itself decides who gets to see the next spring? In the years when winter stretched on like a sentence, the Vikings understood clearly that salt, smoke, or ice could only delay death, never defeat it. And when a second winter arrived before summer could rebuild the livestock herds, despair spread across the farms like darkness clinging to the rooftops. Archaeology in Greenland reveals what the sagas never dared to write openly. In the most desperate months, the Vikings ate dogs, horses, animals considered sacred, companions, the last symbols of honor. Dog bones scraped clean, horse bones cracked open for marrow, all lying mixed with cattle and seal bones, exposing a truth that couldn't be avoided. When death stood outside the door, nothing remained sacred. Climate records from the dark phase of the 9th to 10th centuries show sudden cold spells that emptied food stores ahead of time, turning late autumn feasts into distant memories. Hunger didn't just steal strength, it dismantled social order, erased taboos, and forced people into choices they would never have imagined under normal circumstances. In the Viking world, it wasn't war, but famine that was the most brutal enemy. The force that made people trade customs, beliefs, and pride just to survive one more season. In Viking society, meat wasn't just food. It was the stage where power was displayed in its rawest form. The tool chieftains used to prove they deserved to lead both in battle and through winter. The great feasts at Borg, where an 80-meter longhouse was found, were not carefree gatherings. They were carefully orchestrated political performances. When trays of beef, wild boar, and lamb were brought out under the flicker of firelight, the person at the head of the table didn't just eat better, they ate with authority. Archaeological evidence shows that the best cuts, like ribs and tenderloins, were always placed before the jarls and their closest warriors, while the less valuable portions were passed down the rows, a subtle arrangement reminding everyone of their rank without a word being spoken. What makes this scene even sharper is how chieftains showed off their wealth, slaughtering more livestock than necessary, serving the rarest and largest cuts, proving they had the ability to feed the entire community through the coming harsh season. The sagas even describe oath-swearing feasts where each piece of meat handed over was equal to a pledge of loyalty. This wasn't just eating, it was diplomacy, strategy, and the way a leader proved they were worth following. In the Viking world, the one who controlled the meat didn't just control the feast. They controlled loyalty, reputation, and the future of the entire community. Some archaeological discoveries sound small at first, but once they're placed correctly into the Viking picture, they suddenly become pieces that shake the entire story. One of those pieces is the sealed wooden barrels lined with pine resin found at Adabi and multiple Norse settlements. Small, ugly barrels covered in knife marks, but inside them were traces of fat, protein fibers, and salt crystals, showing that the Vikings did something we never expected. They didn't just salado, didn't just smoke, didn't just rely on winter as a natural refrigerator, but also knew how to seal meat in an almost sterile environment, allowing it to last for months, even through whole traveling seasons. This nearly collapses the old assumption about their primitiveness. These sealed meat barrels reveal the existence of a logistical system so complex it could supply armies moving hundreds of kilometers without needing to hunt along the way. And what is even more surprising is the cold calculation behind it. They didn't rely on lucky weather, didn't leave things to chance, but planned long-term storage like a civilization that understood survival wasn't about strength, but preparation. From a modern perspective, those wooden barrels feel like a quiet reminder. Sometimes the survival of a community isn't determined by the weapons they carry, but by the precision with which they preserve what is most easily lost: time, food, and the ability to reach tomorrow. If this discovery changes the way you see the Vikings, feel free to leave a thought below. And don't forget to subscribe so we can keep opening the doors of history that still remain closed.